the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. We did it because the situation could not be dealt with under any other law in Canada.
We share the concern of many Canadians that the government may misuse the powers in the Emergencies Act. So I want to be very clear. We will be watching.
Throughout the last 3 weeks, the Prime Minister has failed to take meaningful action to de-escalate the protests here or use any tools that he may have available. Instead, he has jumped straight to the most extreme measure.
The government spent the day defending its use of the Emergencies Act, with the opposition parties demanding to know the evidence suggesting there were ideological security threats taking place. The debate will continue in the coming days. MPs expected to vote on Monday evening. It's Thursday. At Issue is back. Andrew Coyne, Althia and Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Chantal is away tonight. Andrew, I'll start with you. Obviously the onus is on the government to prove that this is needed. Are they doing a good enough job explaining it to opposition parties and to Canadians?
Not yet, no, and perhaps they never will. I don't know, but I would not say that people would be satisfied at this point that they've met the very stringent test that's in the Emergencies Act legislation itself. I'm less concerned about the specific powers that they're asking to be able to use. I know people have tried to make a big to-do out of, will they be able to commandeer tow trucks, or will they be able to intervene in financial institutions that are where people are funding illegal assemblies. Those don't strike me as overdrawn on the face of it. And when people say at one and the same time that police already have these powers and that it's a dictatorial overreach, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance. But I do think the question of whether it meets the threshold before you can invoke the legislation at all is an important one, because we don't want legislation of this kind to be invoked willy-nilly. We don't want it to be brought in for trivial matters. We don't want to normalize it. I think those concerns are absolutely fair, and it is up to the government, at least in the court of public opinion, to show that it's met that test. And of course, we're now hearing of a lawsuit by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, so they may have to prove it in court.
Althia, how are you listening to their arguments, some of which I think seem to be based on the fact that there was little effort or little success on the part of police inside in Ottawa?
The federal government is saying many different things at the same time. And I think that, to Andrew's point, if there are security threats, that has not been made clear to any of us yet, and we may not know that. The inquiry at the end of this may not actually even be public, so there may be details that we are never privy to. I don't think the government would be doing this if the City of Ottawa, the police service, had done its job, and if the government of Ontario, frankly, had done its job. I agree with Andrew. I think it's very important that we don't normalize the use of the Emergencies Act. We do not want this to become, it's like the notwithstanding clause. As soon as one government uses it, you kind of worry that this can of worm has been opened and other governments might use it willy-nilly, to use Andrew's point. You don't want that to happen. I don't know, and I made this point on Monday, I don't know that they have proven that there is no other tool in their toolbox to use. But I don't think we would be here if, for example, the government of Ontario had given itself some powers in its Emergency Act to do what the government is doing. And I think there's a political reason why the Liberals want to do this. And they would not be doing this if this wasn't happening in Ottawa, frankly. If this was happening in Vancouver or Edmonton, I think there's a feeling in this town that it is almost like the federal government is a parent. And we can't handle our own things, so we are asking Ottawa, the federal government here, to step in, which doesn't exist in, most provinces outside of Ontario.
Presumably, Elamin, some of what the government must know are not things that we can know. The intelligence or, indications that they have of what may or may not be a threat. Presumably, those are things that they cannot talk about right now, or to Althia's point, maybe ever.
Sure, but I think it would still behoove us to be very wary of that, like very wary of the idea that the government can sort of pull such an act while never having to explain themselves. I think the act itself actually calls for a commission later on to sort of explain why it needed to be triggered, what other safety mechanisms had to have failed in order to get to this point. That's a good thing that we built that into our democracy. It's a good thing that we will at some point know. At some point we'll investigate this. But right now, we sort of open the segment by saying that that the government is out there defending its decision, I'm not sure that I've heard a defense. Like, I'm not sure that I've heard a sort of a clear-eyed, sort of articulate defense of what this is. I think you can maybe sort of cobble together that the idea that maybe they wanted to impose these financial restrictions and this was the only way they could do that, and this is one way to choke, you know, the lifeblood of this protest in order to convince some people to leave. But I think I just made that point more articulately than they have in the last couple of days. And I'm not, that's just conjecture. Like, I'm not actually sure that that is their justification. So I think it would be helpful if the government were to articulate some kind of point about why we're here right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they also today added that the Emergencies Act is needed because if they manage to shut down a protest in one location, it could up and move to another location. So it's supposed to, you know, protect the country. I guess a lot of people, though, might ask, Andrew, after listening to the Conservatives today, who were demanding the federal government do more, what was the solution other than this that the federal government could have done? That's the part that I think is perplexing, maybe.
Yeah, and people are looking and saying, well, the police were able to clear away the protesters from the Ambassador Bridge, so why do they need powers in Ottawa? So the situation in Ottawa is very, very different.
Yes.
The protesters are much more dug in. They've been there a long time. They've got infrastructure, they've got supply lines, et cetera. And you can see them sort of methodically, they're building the fence around the perimeter, et cetera, and they're going to sort of do a slow squeeze, I think, on them. So to put the best face on it, what I suspect maybe, and I still say they have to give us some reason to believe them on this, is that A, they're worried about possible violence if and when they try to clear out the protests in Ottawa, and B, as you were suggesting, that there could be fallout from that in the form of retaliatory barricades and blockades going up who knows where. So they're dealing with a fluid and dynamic situation, which may be what they're dealing with, but I'm sort of giving them the best benefit of the doubt there.
And Althia, your thoughts on the Conservatives, you know, saying that the government could have done other things and that they should have done other things before they got to this point?
Well, I think what we're seeing in the House of Commons is political parties who are taking political and ideological stances as opposed to taking principled stances. You could easily imagine the protesters being pro-pipeline protesters and the NDP and the Conservative Party arguing the opposite of what they're arguing in the House at the moment. I think the Liberal government is acting like, frankly, any government in its position would. I think there are things that ring alarm, and there are things that I understand. I understand the wanting to encourage the protesters to leave. I think that's where the financial, like, you are going to lose your commercial license. You are going to lose or your freeze on your commercial bank accounts. That is to encourage them to leave on their own, so there is not a police escalation of it. But you wonder about the overreach when Chrystia Freeland says, well, people who've donated to the Give, Send, Go could have their accounts frozen. I think that is important. And to Elamin's point, you know, at the moment, it says there's an inquiry. I think it's really important for the public and the opposition to demand that inquiry is a public inquiry, so we know exactly what the facts were that the government had at its fingertips before making this decision to go.
Elamin, your thoughts on how the other parties are managing this and handling it?
Well, the trouble with the ideology is that even an ideological clock is right twice a day also. And I think in this particular position, when the Conservatives sort of make the point that at this moment, we don't have a clear articulation of why this act was enacted, like, that is true. We have not actually heard that articulation. We continue to see that the police have the exact same set of tools that they had, you know, on Sunday or Monday before the Emergencies Act was brought into effect. We haven't yet heard a clear articulation of what changed and what they aim to accomplish with this. I think it's sort of us grasping at straws, and I think it's actually troubling that we are having to sort of fill in the blanks for the Liberals, because it is this historic moment, and you would think they would have a sort of clear strategy on how to communicate what they wanted to do with it.
And I mean, it does seem as though the NDP is going to support the government for now, Andrew, so it'll likely just continue as long as they need the Emergencies Act. But I wonder if the debate over the next number of days is going to coincide with the dismantling of what we're seeing in Ottawa.
Well, and don't forget that Parliament can revoke its authorization for this, and we're in a minority Parliament. So that's a non-trivial vow by the NDP that if Parliament turns against this, then there's very high stakes for the government on this. I know they're getting public support right now, as commonly is the case in the first flush of of an emergency like this. But this could turn very, very badly for them politically in a hurry. So there's real risks for them politically in this.
30 seconds to you, Althia.
Well, I mean, if everything is cleared Monday evening, the MPs may be asked to vote on something that is no longer needed. So that might spare the government a lot of embarrassment. I think the government has made its case. I'm just not sure that I buy it, right? I mean, you hear them say at the borders, for example, that the emergency measures are going to prevent more blockades from happening. I don't know that that's true, but I think they are making their case. I just think that maybe most of us watching carefully are not convinced of it yet.
Last word to you, Elamin.
I think we don't have a lot of time for them to make that case. And I think that is a trouble for the government, because this will be a lasting memory of the Trudeau government, the fact that they sort of reached for this tool. I think how they are remembered will be measured by this. And so I think they have to actually get in front of it and make that case, because if they want this to be remembered as a sort of solid, logical move, we haven't heard that justification yet.
Yeah, and maybe how this gets undone becomes part of whether it worked and whether it was the right thing to do or not. Okay, good conversation, everyone. Thank you. Glad you came back twice this week.